All right. Oh,
Okay.
yep. Yours.
Just two things to start with. One, I don't consider myself an expert. I've been doing this for about 15 years, but it's all learning on my own, by trial and error, and I know I can do a lot better. Also point out that different people have different ideas of what they want to get out of this. Some people want photographs that are presentation quality. Other people want more documentation of what they did. So again, it's up to your personal interest on what you do. When I got started, I was wanting to do a large volume of photography. Specifically, I wanted to photograph the entire visible NGC catalog and later the IC catalog.
Wow.
So because I didn't have 3 or 4 hours to play with each particular object, it was how many can I get done and get presentable or usable results that would document more scientifically than aesthetically. Okay, I'm gonna try and share my screen now. Starting off.
I probably will have to give you permission, so let me just do that. We should have.
Okay.
Yep. Can everybody see it?
Should be a title slide of
Looks good.
Looks
Yeah,
good to me.
Go full screen. Okay, my equipment, I have an astrophysics 130, it's 130 millimeter objective refracting telescope with a nominal focal length of 858 millimeters. I have a compressor on it, so it's working at f4.5 at was it 585 or something like that millimeters. I have electronic focuser. It's a Starlight Boss 2. The imaging camera I'm using is a Santa Barbara ST8300 with beta filters on it. My mount's an Astrophysics Mach 2 on a PureTech. It's a permanent observatory in the backyard. For a guider, I have the beta variable finder. It's a 50 millimeter refractor. Guiding cameras in STI. For flat field, I have a LED panel, or electroluminescent panel rather, by Elnatec. And I have a temperature humidity monitor. Just in theory, the software that drives the mount uses this to compensate for refraction. I don't really think it does too much. It's more for personal interest to watch the temperature independent of the temperature of the observatory, as opposed to the temperature sensor in the focuser, which is the temperature of the scope itself. So there's some variation between the two. This is the setup I have in the backyard when I'm imaging. The guide scope's on the far side. You can see the guide scope up on top, sticking its head out. Mm-hmm. And the focuser's down in here. These cables going to it, and that's the red box at the back of the camera. It's from the other direction. I've got a laptop out there I use for processing, or for actually taking the images. Most of the processing, I'll do quick looks in the observatory and then bring them indoors and do them on my desktop. And you can see it's the color wheel package there, taking up a lot of space.
Yeah.
For software, I'm using ASCOM. For the using PemPro to do the polar alignment and a periodic error, and I use Focus Max 3 most of the time for my focuser. Well, sometimes I use Maxim. I have an Optech software for the focuser driver and the flat fielder. For the cameras, I'm using the drivers provided by Santa Barbara. For the mount, I'm using Astrophysics Control Console. I was one of the beta users for this, so I got a copy of it for nothing. For planetarium software and for logging, I use SkyMap Pro, which unfortunately is no longer available. It was a one-person shop, and he had some serious medical problems, and the website went off the air. So I hope he's okay, but it's been a couple years since I've heard anything on that. My primary software is Maxim DL for controlling the camera, for imaging processing, and for tracking and miscellaneous functions. And then with that, I use DC3's Pinpoint for doing plate solves. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a fantastic piece of software. It's written by a guy over in Mesa.
So did you have to get it all working together on your PC then?
Yes. The hardest thing to get working was was Focus Max. And I'm still not entirely happy with that. For imaging, it works great. For spectroscopy, there's a bit of an issue because the main thing I'm focusing on is split in half, so it's not always a good image, depending on how it dithers across the slit. Okay, I first set up the observatory. The first thing I do is, everybody does, is you line your mount to close to true north. I install all the equipment on the mount, balance the mount, and verify the setup. This is a one-time deal. Next, during the daytime or on a cloudy night, I'll manually rough focus the cameras. I'll generate my library of darks and bias frames, and I'll repeat this typically every 6 months, or whenever there's a major change in the outside air temperature. Now, one area that I've heard stories both ways with regards to the darks. One of the speakers here, I think it was this club a couple months ago, talked about taking long period darks like 5 minutes and then using bias frames to compensate for shorter exposures. Other people recommend darks being taken the same exposure time as the imaging. I've done it both ways. I don't see much of a difference, really. I generate a library of flats. This I do once a month or whenever I change my optical train. And I have issues taking flats with the narrowband filters. My panel doesn't put out much energy in those frequencies. You use sky flats, which work a little bit better, or the software will use an existing luminance flat if it doesn't have a correct flat to use, which takes care of dust donuts on the sensor, on the camera, on the sensor itself, but not on the filters. And then I'll generate target lists that I want to use over the next month or two. I do this for Skype Pro.
So Bruce, for the darks, is your camera temperature control? I presume it is, right? So you don't have to worry about the variations during summer and fall.
No, the camera is cooled. You do have to worry a little bit. Like right now, the coldest I can get is about +5 centigrade Celsius. During the winter, I'll go to -30.
Okay, yeah.
But likewise, right now, there's no way I can take darks at -30. I can't get anything that cold.
Right.
And get it down to 0, maybe -5 with some ice packs. But it's easier just to wait and take them when I need them.
You said with ice packs? You actually have ice packs that you hang on there?
I've done that. I've taken darks in the house, putting it in a insulated thermos container with blue ice packs around it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
First moonlit light, and then again about once a year, or a little more often, I'll align the guide scope with the main scope. I'll set the camera angle and sync the mount with plate solves so the mount knows where the telescope is pointing. I'll calibrate the guider. I'll generate focus curves and determine if I need any deltas for the filters. Somebody was just talking about getting all their filters parfocal. Sometimes you get from different manufacturers or not. And you have to refocus, and I can put it in so when I change the filter, it automatically moves the focuser a fixed amount, so I don't have to refocus every time I change filters. The only one I have that isn't parfocal really is somebody a few years ago was selling a light pollution filter of the size that would fit in on my color wheel. And it's a different manufacturer, and it's significantly different optical density, so it needs a different focus adjustment. Calibrate the guider. Okay, so that I resync the mount. I verify my periodic errors. My mount is the software on my mount is designed so I can program it on areas not to go. It's set up so I can program, so I can point the scope with the counterweight high and the scope low, which is good if you want to, if you're working near the meridian, you don't have to flop the scope over when you cross it. It'll actually cross over and work kind of upside down.
Can you repeat that? I didn't quite understand what you said.
Okay, if you're using a German equatorial mount,
Yeah,
normally your telescope's on top and your weights are pointing towards the ground somehow.
correct.
If you start photographing something, say an hour before the meridian, and you want to keep photographing after you pass the meridian, your mount will normally flip 180 degrees and pick up the other side.
Right.
My scope will keep going, so the counterweights are now high and the scope is low.
Mhm.
The problem is you can hit the mount easily doing that.
Right.
So my software is set up so I put in guard bands and let it know how far I can take it
Gotcha.
for different pointing angles.
Gotcha. Mhm.
Also set up so that I program it so it won't point at the neighbor's roofs when I'm going towards the horizon. If you've ever tried shooting the, for example, Omega Centauri, which is very low in the sky, but a fantastic target, or Centaurus A, you're really skimming the neighbor's houses. At least I am on those targets. For both Maxim and SkyMax, they'll display images of the region of the sky, and I set a field of view display so I'll know what my camera sees overlaid on those images. I'll take some images of stars I know to be white and set exposure ratios of my RGB so that it comes out white. If you're working monochrome, you have a choice. You may be lucky to get filters that match your camera so they all have the same exposure to get a white. Or you can set the gain separately, or you can set the exposure times differently to compensate for the filters themselves.
And you just have to play with it until you get the right ratios, or is it really...
I'll show you that when I show the processing.
Okay, all right, good.
What I do is I point to a star that I know to be white, specifically one that I know is a G2 class star, and click on that, and it'll set the exposure so that'll balance what shows up on the display. My display's off a little bit, so I have to tweak it a little bit. And I'll take samples of both luminance and hydrogen. Yeah, sore throat. Come imaging night, I'll select a target I want to start with. Determine if I'm going to be shooting luminance only, color only, hydrogen alpha only, or all three, or everything. Slew to the target. I'll then take a monochrome image with a 3x3 binning and adjust the framing so I'm picking up not just, because you don't always want your main object right in the center of your frame. Sometimes there's stuff around the edges that you want to include also.
Right.
Like some of the Messiers, you can get 2 or 3 in your field of view depending on which ones you're shooting. So I'll then do that, all working at 3x3 in monochrome. From that, based on how bright it is, I'll determine what my base exposure time is going to be for the luminance frame at the 2x2 or 1x1 binning I'm going to wind up using. I then take the final frames themselves at final binning. I'll do a quick process out in the observatory to see if the images look reasonable. And if they're good, then I'll move on to the next target, and I'll do this until I get too tired, it gets light out, or the moon gets in the way. I'm sure you've all been there.
Yeah.
The next morning, when I bring the data inside on a thumb drive, I'll calibrate and align the frames. The software I'm using does them both at the same time. I'll save the result as a fits image for my records with no processing at all other than the calibration. I'll clean up the background, I'll apply various noise filters. I'll balance the color. I'll then do a nonlinear stretch, which I'll show you using a log stretch typically for stars and gamma stretches for nebulae. I'll convert that to 8-bit data, annotate the image if I desire, and then save it as a JPEG.
So I have 2 questions. Are you going to, first of all, show us how you calibrate and align your frames
Sure.
as such? And,
it's all automatic, but I'll do it. That's part of the process.
Yeah. And why do you convert to 8-bit? I mean, why?
Because
I've seen you talk about 8-bit, so.
JPEG is an 8-bit format. If you try and save a JPEG in JPEG format at 16-bit or 12-bit, you're going to lose some of the data. And I've done that. When I first got started, I wound up with all white or all black images. They look good on the screen, but I save them. Don't go back and check what I saved till it's too late to do it again. Some software will automatically convert it to 8-bit. When you try saving a JPEG, some will, it'll stretch it to 8-bit. Some will just save the 8 most significant or 8 least significant bits. So it depends on how your computer's set up.
Got it.
Okay, now I'm going to try and switch software packages, and you have the new image up there
Coming up, I think.
with several windows in there.
They're all both, at least on my screen, they're both black, and your PowerPoint is still showing in the background.
This says what I'm sharing. This should be Maxim DL Pro 6 in the upper left corner.
Stop sharing the PowerPoint, maybe.
Let me get it. Oh, let me get out of PowerPoint. Share screen. How about now?
Yes.
Okay,
That's the Maxim DL screen, yeah.
Okay, there's 4 windows showing in there.
Yeah, see them all.
Oops. This is the one down here in the lower right is the setup panel. Lets me connect to telescope, focusers, rotator, any other equipment. It'll also show me a view of the sky. It'll let me zoom in on a specific area that I'm looking at. It'll let me put in what I want to look at. So I tell what I'm looking for a Deep Space catalog. I want to look at Bernard 36. It'll search for it, and I can zoom to it, and it'll show me that. This is the image. And I can also, it's not lit up now because of my camera. Let me connect the camera.
Yeah.
I don't have a mount connected. I hit go to, and it'll slew the telescope to that particular target. Up here is the camera control. It normally connects automatically on power up. I just have a dummy camera in there now. It'll run 2 cameras. I normally use camera 1 for imaging, camera 2 for guiding. You set the cooler temperature. There's a guiding window. You do calibration, exposure guide camera on what star you want to guide on, or multiple stars. Calibrate it once to make sure it knows which way's up and which way's down or sideways. And then one of the features it has, when I'm ready to take pictures, I can either set up a fixed, tell how many seconds I want for a single shot, and go over here and tell it whether I want no calibration, just a simple dark or full calibration on that image based on, if I do a full calibration, it has to be data that's already in libraries. Right. If I just do auto dark, it'll take a dark frame and then take the image, the light frame, and do the calibration right then and there.
So if you choose full calibration, it'll ask you to select then which masters you want, basically?
I'll get there in a second.
Okay.
Also in here, I hit autosave, and I can do continuous, or just keep taking them, or hit autosave. And that lets me program a sequence of images I want to take. I want to take 4 different sets of light frames. Oops. So this is a suffix to be on the file name. I set the exposures I want for that set, the binning I want, and how many of those I want to take. And just save that, put a name on that, that tell what I'm imaging. And then when I hit start, it'll take that whole sequence of frames. I can even do it so it'll take all of one color at a time, or so it'll alternate going down the list.
And the exposure ratios are a one-time deal, I presume, right? That that you determine?
Actually, yes. Get back to it. So for example, on, assuming they're all been the same, I'll use, say 1 second on luminance, 1 second on red, 1.6 on green, and 2.6 on blue, or whatever it worked out to. Okay, over here, there's a process for calibration. This is what you do beforehand when it wakes up. You point to a folder that has all your dark frames and flat frames and bias frames, and it'll load them into its memory. Or you can tell it to create masters. So it'll take all the darks that are given binning, given time and given temperature, and combine all those and store the resultant, which gives you faster operation. Under advanced, you tell it whether, for full calibration, whether you want to do calibrated biases, you want to darks in there, flats, you want to subtract, dark subtract the flats, or bias subtract the flats. So this is how you set up the calibration routine. Then when you're ready to process, you go into process stack, you want to add files. So I'm going to do the data I saved on M3, which happens to be in a folder called M3. And these were test cases here. So I've got, see, this is the first exposure with the red filter, second with the red filter. Down here's the blue filter, green filter, luminance, first exposure through, in this case, 16 exposures with each filter. So I select all of those. And it loads them into here. It sorts them by color, which it knows from the FITS header. The header tells you what color filter it is, and that's the way this program sorts them. And that's what folders, what files, images went in the red folder.
Nice, yeah.
You can then tell it to eliminate bad images based on how sharp the image is, how round the image is, how bright it is, or how much contrast there is. So it'll, of the 15 I gave it or 5 I gave it, it'll just pick the ones that it likes. Then you go to the align mode and you pick how you want to align it. You can use autocorrelation, which has a plate solve on every frame and then matches the coordinates. This is excellent, but it takes quite a while because you're doing a plate solve on every image. Star matching is what I normally use. It'll try and match 50 or 100 stars. It has the advantage that if your images are taken at different scales, it'll compensate for that, and it'll align everything to whatever you told it was your baseline frame. So if I'm taking some at 1 by 1 and some at 3 by 3, it'll automatically compensate for that and present them all, convert them all to 1 by 1. You can also do a manual 1 star or 2 star, which you'll do if you're photographing a planet or something. We just want to line on the center of it, or if you're a comet. Like I said, I normally use star matching. I'll then tell it to do the align and doing calibration at the same time. Color lets, if I'm using some weird combination of filters, lets me map the red input into red and green, for example. I've never used any of this, but it's there. Then I tell them to combine them. I can either, for each one's done independently, so I can either have it sum all the reds, take average of all the reds, take the median of the reds, do a sigma clip, which throws out the images which have high standard deviations from the mean, or an SD match, which is similar. Both of these require a lot of, well, the more frames you have, the better they work, but I'll normally use a sigma clip. And then tell it to go. Here's my luminance frame, my red frame, my blue frame, my red frame, and then it also combines and gives me an LGB frame here. which you have to look really close to see the colors in it. These are some.
So
Blow it
Bruce,
up.
if you hadn't done the exposure ratios by hand, could this software adjust for the exposure ratio based on?
Easily.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, I go to color balance. And then I click on someplace where there's no stars to do or just do an auto for the background. So make the background black. And then point to a star that I know should be white and click on it.
Mhm.
And it'll adjust these scaling factors to make that actually white.
Okay.
Here, like this one's kind of reddish looking. If I hit this, it should change the color of everything.
Right.
Well, you'll see it more on when I do the. Here's a red one. Yeah, that was red. I turned it white, but turned everything else green.
Right. I see that.
And then you can record these numbers and use these to feed back to the camera setup.
Yep. Got it.
And then what I do, I'll save this, except with no processing. Then I'll do some stretching. So first I stretch it so it's just barely visible. And then for this, I'll do a stretch. And I'll do a gamma stretch. And then bring it back in. You can see they picked up some more red that doesn't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'll go back and where am I? I've got a window open and can't find it. There it is. So I get back in and this one looks a little, well, it's actually that's not too bad, but there's a lot of pink ones in here, which may be red stars, or it could be I'm off a little bit because I was playing with it.
M3 has a lot of red stars, isn't it?
Label it. Then stretch it. This time I'll do a linear stretch and take it down to 8-bit. And then save that as a JPEG. And here you can see the individual frames. There's a blue. Let me shrink them all. There's the red, blue, and green, and there's the
Final.
there's the luminance, and there's the final. So it's what, 10 minutes?
Yeah. So do you ever have to go into Photoshop, or you can just leave it there?
Normally I'll leave it there unless I'm trying to do something for a presentation where I want it to look super.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I don't use Photoshop. I just don't like the concept of paying rent on software. I use one by Corel. I can't think. I'll look it up in a second. It's very similar, but it's one you pay for once.
Mm-hmm.
It's also because I've been using that for like 20 years.
And I don't see any gradients or any noise in your pictures. Is that because?
Let me go back to a single shot. before I calibrated them. And let me get rid of these. Let me open a single frame, illuminance.
Yeah, that's what I expected to see.
Yeah, here you see there's a dirt speck. You see a circle here, a couple of them up here.
Oh, so your calibration took care of it, huh?
I'll just calibrate this one shot, this one image, and this isn't stacked or anything, and it's only a 10-second exposure. It's still a little noisy, but cleaned up the dirt spots. And then what I can do, just cut the background down a bit.
All right, got it.
You also know how small the stars are.
Yeah.
I find it much preferable to get the stars as small as possible with super focusing rather than trying to use software to shrink them afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
The filter, you can also play with all sorts of filters are included. Digital development, deconvolution, which works great on some stuff and horrible on others. Some of these others you play with once or twice and then forget about.
So deconvolution is to what? To bring more contrast into the picture?
No, deconvolution is actually what they had to use with Hubble. It's if your stars don't come out round.
Oh.
What it does is
So it does compensation for motion and stuff like that?
No, say you have astigmatism in your optics, or look towards the corners of your picture if they're not in sharp focus. But mostly if your lenses aren't parallel to each other, or you're not properly collimated on your refractor, you'll wind up with elliptical shaped stars. You know the stars are supposed to be circular. So this software takes a look at what it comes up with a method of taking a circular object and turning it elliptical to match what you have, and then does the same thing backwards on the entire frame. So it distorts the picture to distort the elliptical dots back to circular dots.
So I don't know if my eyes are good enough or not, but am I seeing some of your stars looking elongated in the picture? No, I think it's my eyes. Oh, I'm not sure.
Well, there's individual pixels.
Yeah. No, I think it's my eyes. Yep.
I can show you some older ones that they're out of focus.
No, I just wondered.
Okay, now let's do some with serious color in them. Okay, this is Orion with hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3. Same, I'll align them. And calibrate them.
So similar question again here. When you're using these narrowband filters, do you have to worry about the ratio of the exposure times and kind of calibrating it to the white, or you just use some of the white stars at the bottom in the picture to do it?
It depends what you're trying to do.
Okay.
Again, this will never look. This is just LGB. This does not have the narrowband in it yet. So this is just the wideband, the 3 wideband filters and luminance.
I see. Okay.
But again, what does color mean? It'll never look this way to your eye from Earth or from standing next to it. Your eyes just can't see those colors.
True.
So it depends what you're trying to show. So sometimes get white stars before I put the narrow bands in, and then with the narrow bands, I'll adjust them before or after, depending on what it is I'm trying to show.
Because I think some people do just narrowband imaging and don't use the RGB. Or maybe I'm wrong. Because
Well, I'll do narrowband just in alpha, like I said, for those sharpless objects. There's no color to them anyways. They're just very faint, fuzzy nebulae. So now I want to do a combined. So I'll blend the narrowband. Oops. Let me start that over. I skipped a step. Okay, so for my master, I want it to be the luminance frame. And this this loads in the 6 masters that I have now.
Okay.
And also says when it converts to screen color, this is what wavelength it'll use for that particular filter. So my blue filter is going to display the equivalent of 440 nanometers or 4,400 angstroms. My HA alpha is going to display the equivalent of 65, 63 angstroms. My action is going to be right at 5,000 angstroms. But you can change these if you want. For example, some of the Hubble stuff, they had the narrow bands at really strange places trying to emphasize.
Right.
And there's the combined, and you can see the alpha is overpowering. Let me get these others out of here.
Okay, guys, this is what they were.
This is the problem. Zoom puts a message right where I'm trying to click. Okay, so this is LGB, and this is with alpha and oxygen.
You don't see any green in that. I suppose it's.
There's not much. There's some down in here.
Okay. Yeah.
And let's. I'll do a stretch on it. And like I said, this was these were just 10-second exposures each, just to get some slides for this demonstration.
Sure.
Let me see if I have a. Oops.
Yeah, I just asked that question because I find getting the blues out really, really tough because they tend to be much fainter than anything else.
You know, I also originally had a sulfur filter also and found it was doing nothing for me.
Mm.
There was very little bright sulfur. And
but the M42 or the region around it, there's a lot of oxygen and wavelengths around it, isn't it? Maybe not.
let me try this one. I don't know if you can see it around here, around the edges of the.
Yeah. Yeah, I just see that. Mhm.
This is a sharpless nebula in hydrogen alpha only.
Mhm. A lot of structure there. Huh? Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, you're not going to see that unless you go to alpha. At
Yeah.
least not out here in the dark site. You might with a luminance filter.
Mhm.
You can also see some little dark areas here and in here, and then over in here.
Mhm.
Question, Bruce, on the sharpless.
Yeah.
So when you do those, do you just leave them as monochrome?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Actually, I leave a lot of my stuff as monochrome.
I don't know. I find monochrome quite beautiful, actually, in a lot of cases.
Yes, it is.
Here's an old one. That's NGC1.
Well, it's very faint. I can barely see it on my screen.
Yeah. I think I have an annotated version also. You see, this is an old one. It wasn't focused very well. You see the difference in the star sizes.
Yeah. That's how mine look. My pictures look.
You know, it's
Wow.
So here you can see some of the oxygen on around this guy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And this, of course, is super saturated. That's a fourth magnitude star. That's one of the stars in Orion's belt.
Antioch? What's that principle? Art?
Zeta or Orionis, I think. It's the leftmost of the three belt stars.
Is that
Easternmost.
the flame nebula, basically, that you see on the left of it?
This is the Flame Nebula over here.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. Yeah.
And of course, the Horsehead down here.
Yeah. Mhm. Oh, we should be able to see these very soon now in the sky.
Yeah, or stay up real late if it ever clears up.
Yeah.
I think Orion's coming up, what, around 10 at night now? 9:30?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
No, a little later than that even.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my house is in the way.
I was thinking it was later. Yeah, it's probably not till 3 or 4 in the morning now.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing.
It was very interesting. Yeah. So, are you going to show some more, or can we ask other questions too?
Ask whatever you want, or I'll show you whatever you want that I've got.
I had a question about the observatory because I've got a mount and it's pretty heavy, and I would ideally like to leave my system on my patio all wired up. And so I had a question about heat in your observatory and whether you have any issues with with heat there, or you have to cool it down, or you're not worried about it, or what?
Don't touch the mount. I found the observatory gets to about 160 degrees.
Wow. And so you got it, all the electronics and your cameras and everything all wired up in there all the time?
Yeah, it's all set up permanent.
Okay. Is anybody else in this group worry about the heat? Because I've asked some people even about leaving things in the garage, and they said don't.
But it will affect the life of the electronics. I know that.
Mm.
For most semiconductors, the every 7 degrees Celsius cuts the life in half.
Yeah.
Before this mount, I used to have a Lasmondy mount, and it could not take the heat. Even without leaving it outside, no, take that back. It wasn't the observatory, but in midsummer or the hottest month, which is usually June, I used to have to strap an ice pack to the back of the computer unit for the mount for it to work.
Wow. Oh.
And I originally went with the permanent observatory for the same reason. I was using a 10-inch scope, which was just too heavy for me. In fact, it's sitting in the garage now. I want to sell it one of these days. I just can't handle that weight anymore.
Well, I've run out of questions. Any other questions, Chuck, Larry, Bob?
I don't think I really got any right now.
Okay.
I appreciate this, Bruce. It helps see what someone does when they go through this.
You know, your software makes it look so easy in some sense that, you know, it's just a matter of getting the right numbers in there, and then.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me do one other thing. If you have, you can also, not sure, Jerry, you can do a plate solve. And that just solve this image. Gives me the right ascension, the declination of the center of the frame, the rotation angle of the frame, the focal length of the scope, which is 587.
Uh-huh.
And my scale factor is 3.8 arc seconds per pixel.
Oh, and what are you using for plate solving here?
This is a pinpoint.
Pinpoint. Okay. And is all the other components of software kind of integrated into MaximDL for you, or you're running that kind of outside it?
MaximDL can do everything. It includes a focuser, although I use Focus Max just because it's faster. But I've also done. I use this focuser software if it looks like I'm pretty far out of focus. It works better over long errors. But the focuser software, both of them prefer working with a absolute focuser, one that knows its position rather than just DC motor.
Yeah.
Maxim software, I believe, is fairly expensive. It was when I bought it, which is about 10 years ago.
Still is. I mean, I kind of briefly looked at it a long time ago.
There were 4 or 5 different versions of it, depending on what kind of camera you have and whether you want to control the camera or not.
Mm. Yeah.
But I haven't priced it in ages.
Yeah. Very good, Bruce. Very good. Mm-hmm.
So again, this is kind of why I'm not joining in on all of the questions on the web, on the user group, just because I'm not familiar with any of that software. I haven't found a need for it the way for most of what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, you can see questions from people like myself on that users group, but
Yeah. I do read everything you guys post. It just says I don't have anything to contribute because I'm not familiar with the packages you're using.
yeah, and I'm always relying on Chuck and Larry to answer my questions because they're about doing the same thing or using the same tools as I am just about. Any other questions from anybody else? I mean, we brought up the users group. Well, we don't seem to have too much participation on the users group. So if you've got a few minutes and anybody's got feedback on the users group or anything we could do in on our Zoom sessions, this be a nice time to give me that input. For August, I am twisting Larry's arm to give us a presentation. And then in September, we'll have Bernard Miller back talking about processing with Photoshop. And he says he would like to do an hour or hour and a half session with us. So at least you got two presenters lined up for the next 2 months. But I haven't got anybody after that. So if you had any ideas or anything, just send me an email. Or if you want to provide any feedback right now, that'd be good too.
Okay, I don't know if all you guys are on the mailing list for East Valley Club, but next meeting, which is August 20th, they're going to be talking about photographing sunspots.
Oh,
So you guys might want to be interested in that one.
right. Right. Have you done any planetary imaging at all, Bruce? And so how different would the workflow be for planetary?
Quite a bit. Let me get one. Let me see what looks good. There's an old Jupiter image.
These were frames out of a video, or?
Yeah, it's a combined video. Well, first of all, if you want planets, you need a long focal length telescope, and then put a Barlow or Power Max on that. My primary scope's like I said, a 800 millimeter focal length native, and I put a 4X on that. It's just barely usable for planetary use, but the telescope is a little long to fit in my observatory comfortably. It is done with a video camera. I use a software called Registrax, which is free.
Yep.
Typically take between 1,000 and 10,000 frames. It'll sort them, pick the best 10%, and then combine those and process that.
And Registries does that, or
Yes.
for you, or you've got to go through all those pictures yourself?
No, that's it. The Registrax, you just feed the video. You save the video and feed the video into Registrax. Well, there's another program, I forget what it's called, also a European program that is very similar, does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
What's tricky is if you want to see the bands of Jupiter and the moons at the same time, there's just so much difference in intensity. You kind of have to do that 2 pictures separately and combine them. It's one of the cases where you do use Photoshop.
Ah, I see. Mm-hmm.
Same if you tried doing the Saturn and Jupiter together. It sounded easy until you tried and found so much intensity difference between them. Again, you couldn't get both planets, the moons and bands. If Jupiter would be washed out, you wouldn't see Saturn's rings. Just a huge intensity difference, even with a 16-bit camera.
And you're doing this at 3,200 focal length?
This particular one here was 1,600 times 4, 6,400.
Wow. Because that's one thing I was going to try. I think I'm not going to now. I don't know how to get to those focal lengths.
It also depends how small your pixels are on the camera.
Yeah.
Because the smaller the pixel, the less focal length you need.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Well, if you have a 2K chip that's with small pixels, it has or 2K with big pixels, the big pixels can be a larger total area, which means the image of itself uses a much smaller percentage of the picture.
Mm.
If you can follow that. The smaller the pixels, the more pixels you get on covering the image of the planet itself.
And Bruce, when you're doing this, it's a color camera, single shot color, right?
Yes. Yeah, this was just a cheap Philips webcam that 7 or 8 years ago, and the camera died. I couldn't replace it. But normal webcam that'll fit in your scope works great. I just got a QHY full color that I'm going to start playing with when the weather cools down a bit. And I think I mentioned I got that because it'll go fairly deep into the infrared also, and has a filter, so you can do either tricolor or straight IR.
Can you use the DSLRs for this photography? Or you don't need cool cameras for this, right?
No, not at all.
So the software that you talk about basically chooses those frames and stacks them up?
It'll sort them in order, and then you tell where to cut them off.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just taken with my point and shoot Nikon without no telescope.
Without a telescope? Is that what
Without
you
a telescope, just zoomed in.
And what kind of a lens? Because I've tried that and I get nothing close to that.
Let's see the camera right now. It's I think it's equivalent of a 1440 millimeter,
Okay.
35 millimeter equivalent of 1440. It's a super zoom point and shoot,
Very nice.
and it has a mode specifically for the moon. And it also has
This is by taking a video and then stacking the.
no. This is just a single picture taken with my Nikon.
Oh, just a single picture.
Yeah.
Boy, it must have been a very still night and very
No,
dark.
moon is super bright. You shoot the full moon. You shoot a 500th with a camera with a 35 millimeter. It has this built in also on the Nikon. That's a 2 hours worth of exposures.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's great, Bruce. Really appreciate that. Any other questions, anybody? Before we kind of call it a day? If not, thank you, Bruce. I really appreciate your doing this.
Sure thing.
And I'm going to stop the recording now and have it posted on our website so others can see it later on. Thanks so much.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Yeah, bye-bye.